Back tonight here in Focus. So let's take you back to one of our top stories tonight. President Cyril Ramaphosa has marked 100 days of the Government of National Unity, saying it's a time of reflection. Political analyst Asanda Ngoasheng joins us now to discuss this further. Asanda, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. ANC has not celebrated 100 days of being in government any time in my recollection anyway. And the fact that the ANC today is sitting here and celebrating 100 days of being in government. Something bizarre about that in itself, is it not?
I think it's an indication that it's a new day and that we are in a new and an interesting political dispensation. I think, the ANC hasn't celebrated 100 days because they've even forgotten what it means to have a new government, because previously they felt that they were guaranteed to be the next government. So there was nothing to celebrate because you're moving, from one ANC administration to the next ANC administration. I think the difference now is that they are in a government of national unity with various other political parties. And so it's important for them to mark something like 100 days of GNU. But I also think it's important for them because they're probably trying to make sure that the DA doesn't steal their thunder and kind of declare all the wins of the GNU as a result of the DA, but that they are able to own the successes of the government that they are the majority shareholder of.
Yeah, let's stick with that a little bit. I mean, Action SA is saying the government of national unity is an Instagram government because these moments are supposed to be utilized. And I suppose the ANC emphasizing that also through the statement by the president that the ANC must utilize this moment of the GNU. But can they, in light of the glaring opposition that is happening to the GNU from within the ANC itself, quite symbolic, I suppose, that the commemoration of the GNU is happening in Gauteng, the very province that doesn't have a provincial government of unity?
Well, they do have a provincial government of national unity. Of unity. It just doesn't have the DA in it, which is their partner at a national level. I do think that it is important that the ANC marked this occasion, and I do think that the ANC is going to have to change the way that it normally does communication, because what the DA is doing is constantly communicating its wins, constantly communicating its activity, which then places the ANC under pressure to do the same. Otherwise, it's going to look like it is the DA that is doing all government work and the ANC ministers are doing nothing. And so this is a sign of the change in the tempo of government communications. And it's actually a good thing, in my opinion, because there is a lot that government does that is good that we never hear about. And what hogs the headlines mainly is the corruption, which is a huge problem. But there is an issue when all people think about when they think about government is corruption, because they then stop believing in their very political systems and their very political institutions that they need to rely on in order for South Africa to continue to be able to move as a normal country or a normal government.
Now, of course, the party seems to, again, maybe this gathering is also an attempt to do that, to convince others within the party, others within the alliance, that the GNU should not be charged by its political orientation of the parties who are in it, but by its impact. And at this time, if, for example, people are not seeing jobs, if at this time people are not seeing a growing economy, the sentiment might be positive, but it would be very difficult to convince those people that the GNU is having impact beyond the political orientation of those who are in it.
Well, I think, this is a tough situation for South Africans because South Africans brought us here. They didn't vote for the ANC to continue to be the leaders of South Africa alone. They voted voted in such a way that we have the kind of arrangement that we have. So if South Africans wanted kind of more of the same, they could have gone out and voted in their numbers for the African National Congress, as they've done for many, many, many years before that. But because they voted differently, this is the government that we have. And so they have to actually figure out a way to either make peace or figure out a different voting strategy for 2029 to give them the kind of configuration that will be satisfactory. Unfortunately, with coalition governments, you really don't always get what you want. But we are, I think, in a good position in one sense, while there are some concerns. So to my mind, the GNU has mostly been successful in that it has actually helped us to balance out two big problems within the two, big political parties of South Africa. One is that the ANC's corruption has to some extent started being called out a lot more. We're seeing, all the corruption that was happening at Public Works, for instance, be coming to light in a lot of ways. And people who were making millions of rands from renting out to government and various other contracts that really do not make sense are now suddenly under the spotlight, and we're able to see where a lot of South African money was going, which it shouldn't have been going to. And that is for kind of how the ANC has been balanced by this GNU. When it comes to the DA, for example, we're seeing that the DA is having to deal with its racists who previously were freely and willingly and allowed to, operate across the different spheres of government and the different spheres of the political party that is the Democratic Alliance. Whereas now, when they started putting them in government, people put up their hands and said, no, we are not going to have these kinds of people represent us. And what was beautiful for me to watch is that the people who were calling out the racists and saying they do not want them representing them were South Africans who were across the color line. So you had black people calling them out and you had white people calling them out, saying these are not the kind of people that we want to laud as heroes or we want to be led by. And that goes for the MP that eventually had to resign, also goes for the chief director that Steenhuisen hired and then had to kind of back away from. So those two cases show us that people and ideologies that are harmful to South Africa, that are problematic to South Africa, that were previously allowed free reign, were no longer tolerated in the party because the party suddenly realized that they could lose power because of the situation. And another way in which these two political parties are balancing themselves is that, on the one hand, you've got the DA, which it keeps threatening to get out of the GNU, but I don't see it getting out of the GNU until at least, some kind of renegotiation, perhaps in 2029, if we have a similar kind of voting pattern, because they have power at a national level for the first time. They've never had this kind of power. We're not likely to get this power with the just over 20% that they got. On the other hand, you've got an ANC which was used to doing as it pleases, ignoring the pleas of the people and allowing corruption to take root without any consequences. And so in this case, what is going to be interesting for me to see is either the DA and the ANC are going to cancel each other out and people are going to be tired of both of them by 2029, or they are going to boost each other and then compete for votes in 2029, or the ANC will swallow the DA and end up getting more votes because it may be seen to be, to be running a much tighter government than it's run before. Yeah. Or the DA may actually swallow the ANC and take its votes because people may feel that the DA has been able to run a much more stringent government and deliver services in a way that hadn't been seen before. And so it is literally one of those situations where both of them stand to lose a lot and both of them stand to gain a lot. But of course, the ANC still has the upper hand because they have that 40%, which they used and showed us their power in Gauteng when they developed a coalition without the DA and still managed to run the government of the province of Gauteng.
But, judging from the speech of the president, he seems to think it's going to go the other way where they will swallow the DA because he says the priority areas of the ANC have been accepted by the GNU. But also in the same vein, he says, well, on the areas where they disagree, we'll persuade them. We are not afraid of them.
Well, he can say that because, as I say, they do still have the majority vote of 40% within the structure, which does give them a lot more power than I think people, kind of concede them having at this point in time. We saw with Bella where, there were some backroom negotiations and some attempts to pull Bella back, but Bella went ahead. And I mean, I heard the kind of, oh no, the president has said that they're not going to implement the various sections because of XYZ. But I know that for a fact, if you go to the Constitutional Court and you force the government to implement, those sections, if they're not implementing them, they're going to be forced to because they are in law. So they didn't pull them out. They are still in law. They've just agreed to kind of put them on pause, which means nothing legally because in the law of the country, they're there. We're seeing the DA having gotten one of its wins, which was the digital nomad visa, which is something that we know that they wanted and they've been wanting for a long time. If you are anywhere near Cape Town, you'll know that every other building that's going up is a building that is apart hotels, which are basically built for this digital nomad booming industry. And however, sadly, one of the things that's happened as a result of this is that local South Africans are unable to find places to stay. Middle-class South Africans are struggling to afford rent within the CBD and even in the suburbs of Cape Town as more and more of Cape Town's housing becomes Airbnbs and apart hotels. And that is a concern that may become a big future problem for the DA because, of course, who votes in South Africa but people who are citizens? And so it doesn't make sense to have, an entire province, which is where the DA governs, filled with people who are not South African and are not here for, the long haul and the long term, while during vote time, you're going to have to actually plead the very same people that you are kicking out of housing and you are kicking out of being able to afford to live in this beautiful city that is still on South African soil. And so there are many challenges that are coming with some of the wins that the DA has come. And of course, equally, there are many challenges that have come with some of the wins that the ANC has got. NHI has so many, there's so many questions around its implementation, its funding, and how it's going to be rolled out. Same thing with Bella, which saw the DA boycott the signing, even though it is the very ministry that's supposed to implement it. And one of the biggest things about Bella is that it actually gives power to the minister to decide. So it's going to be interesting to see how a DA minister who is going to, how they're going to implement a policy that is against their political party and their political party's interests. And of course, the fear of the SACP and other labor movements is that the ANC may be convinced to reduce some of the labor laws that have been put in place and have been in place for the past 30 years. And another big fear for most Black people really is that the ANC may be convinced to scrap BE and affirmative action, which would be a huge problem for South Africa and a huge step back in terms of the attempts at reconstruction and reconstituting the economy of this country and the hue or color of who has wealth and who has power and who is able to enjoy the spoils of this beautiful country called South Africa.
Asanda Ngoasheng, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for your analysis tonight. That's Asanda Ngoasheng there, looking at, of course, the commemoration taking place a little bit earlier on outside Luthuli House, where the president of the ANC, President Cyril Ramaphosa, was addressing that gathering on 100 days of the government of national unity.